And without further ado, I would love to introduce the captain of our ship, Ovid. He is our CEO, and he will go ahead and introduce himself and welcome you to this event.
Thank you very much, Amanda. It is always a unique moment at the end of this Advocacy Week to come together. And I'm so looking forward to the conversation that is about to unfold. I'm eager to hear the perspectives of the wonderful speakers that we have lined up today. But it's also an opportunity to just reflect for a moment about what we all did in the past week. And I love the name EmPOWER ME because being in Washington, D.C. with many of the advocates this week really is a wonderful reminder of the power that we do have as individuals and when we come together. And this was particularly special because this year, for the first time in 4 years, we're able to be in person here in DC on the Capitol Hill and interact directly with members of Congress. And I have to say that going to DC really for a large event like that for the first time in a long time was kind of strange. It was really in a way weird to do those things again, and at the same time incredibly powerful. So the conversations that we had, the ability of all of you to share your stories, I think really helped to not only educate members of Congress, their staffers, but really to help them understand firsthand what it means to have ME, long COVID, those kind of energy limiting disabilities that in many ways are invisible. And so I think we were really able to share the stories in a very personal way, but help people understand really what the implications are. And hopefully this will translate into the kind of political power that translates then into more funding and for research and also for other accommodations that help people in the real world to navigate life in a much easier way. And this is really the topic of our conversation today. The other thing that I was reflecting on this week as we were trying to move from one meeting to another is that we tend to really focus on time management. In fact, most of the things that we did this week, including our meetings, were all about managing the time to get to a point to start a meeting, and then when the meeting is over, or when that particular task is over. But the realization is that energy and time really don't always go hand in hand. And this week really is just for me a unique reminder how energy management is very different from time management. And so I'm really interested in the perspectives that we're going to hear today from the speakers. We're going to hear stories and really very personal ways of managing energy, managing energy limitations in a way that that is empowering. And I think that this is something that we can all learn from, and not only in the context of ME/CFS, long COVID, but other conditions that really share the same limitations. So without taking too much more time from the speakers, Emily, I'd like to hand it over to you to present our speakers, and I look forward to doing this again. Again, thank you for everyone who participated this week. This was a wonderful effort. And the energy that you had to be part of that this week was very well spent. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Ovid, and thank you for joining us to kick off this last event in an amazing week of Advocacy Week activities. This is I believe, our 5th annual EmPOWER ME Summit, a roundtable summit with the theme and the tagline, "So no family has to learn the hard way." Our topic this year was selected by our Lived Experience Task Force here at Solve ME, and they selected the topic, "Navigating the World with Energy Limiting Disabilities." And our tagline for subtext for this is, "Tips for overcoming personal, professional, and medical challenges." So thank you so much again for joining us. I have a really amazing panel that I'm really excited to introduce you to. And because we have 6 specialists with amazing lived experience and amazing professional experience, we're going to start by topic area. So we're going to start with the topic area of our medical professionals and our folks who have experience in medical life. And so excited to begin with introducing Ashanti Daniel, BSN RN, who has been an advocate with several chronic illnesses and nonprofit organizations and has shared her stories in their events, national press events, and Congress. Ashanti is a Black woman with a disabled registered nurse, a single mother living with ME in Southern California. She speaks powerfully, not just to what it is to live with a chronic illness like ME, but what it is to try to get appropriate care as a Black woman navigating structural racism in our current healthcare system. As a former healthcare professional and patient advocate, Ashanti has been educating women of color about ME, CFS, and Long Covid while working to secure recognition for better research as well as care for patients. Ashanti, welcome, welcome. We're so excited to have you. She is joined by Jalen Mercadel, who is also a patient at the Chronic Fatigue Clinic in Johns Hopkins Children's Center. After 2 years of navigating the healthcare system with disabling symptoms, she was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome along with other multiple conditions in August 2021. Professionally, she obtained a BSN from Emory University in 2017 and has worked as a registered nurse in the oncology setting for 5 years with certification in bone marrow transplant. Jalen continues to use her education, knowledge of the system, and access to quality health insurance to navigate the healthcare system for her own challenges while serving as a patient support advocate for others as well. Ashanti, Jalen, thank you so much. I'd love to turn over the floor for your opening comments about the medical topic here today. Ashanti, if you join us first.
Thank you. I appreciate you, Emily. Good morning, everyone. Super early morning for my fellow West Coasters. My name is Ashanti Daniel, and like Emily said, I am a disabled registered nurse turned advocate, single mother, former fitness enthusiast, and person with the sudden onset of post-viral ME nearly 7 years ago. Ironically, or maybe not so much, I was diagnosed with ME on International ME Awareness Day in May 2017, 9 months into my illness. I don't know what any of your belief systems are, but I took that as a sign that the next stage of my life was definitely going to include advocacy. Occasionally, I look at it as ME taking my career away in exchange for a role in advocacy work for the ME and now Long Covid communities. As what I consider to be a veteran in chronic illness land, there are many things I wish I knew at the beginning of this illness. However, I'm only going to share 3 of those things today. The first and one of the most important things I really wish I knew that could have significantly changed the trajectory of my illness in a positive way, and that is the importance of pacing. Even as a nurse, I have to admit, I had no real knowledge of ME and absolutely no concept of post-exertional malaise, PEM, or pacing. Pacing may have saved me from the devastating PEM I experienced doing yoga 5 months into my illness. Believe it or not, yoga. Yes, yoga. You know, most people think yoga is a cure for chronic illness, but that's a different discussion. Anyway, the PEM that the yoga triggered resulted in a permanent worsening of my symptoms. I went to yoga before my official ME diagnosis, thinking I was doing something good for my body to help it recover from what was ailing me. Boy, I could not have been more wrong. It's been over 6 years since my last yoga class, and I have yet to return to my pre-yoga level of functioning, unfortunately. So to those of you who are at the beginning of your illness, please, please, please listen to your body when you feel wiped out. And even when you feel, quote, decent, okay, semi-normal, pacing, though not easy at all, I'll be the first one to tell you, is critical. And speaking of pacing not being easy, I want to point out that Amy, one of our other speakers, will be discussing pacing in more detail towards the end of this roundtable session. Another thing I wish I knew in the beginning of my ME journey was that being a healthcare professional would not shield me from the medical racism that Black women frequently encounter in our healthcare system. Clearly, I'm not awake yet. I can't speak this morning. Just kidding. Anyway, while I have experienced structural racism in healthcare several times throughout my illness, I would like to discuss an example of medical racism that I endured just last month. It's the gift that keeps on giving. For 4 years, I went to the Cedars-Sinai Ambulatory Infusion Center for IVIG infusions twice a month. On one of my infusion days last month, I had been awake most of the night, quite ill, and woke up still having a terrible, very high symptom chronic illness day. I am extremely dependent on my IVIG infusions, so I didn't want to cancel. I somehow got myself together, including accessing my own port per usual, and my ride took me to Cedars for my 11-hour infusion day. I was late that morning, quite late, but called the infusion center to let them know I was really struggling, but would be there. As part of my highly specialized infusion protocol, I receive a large dose of IV Benadryl prior to my infusion and every 3 hours for the duration of my infusion. I don't know about any of you, but I am sensitive to Benadryl. It puts me into what I refer to as a quote Benadryl coma. I literally wake up from my Benadryl slumber with a mask full of drool. Yes, a mask full of drool, yikes. On this particular day, I was rudely awakened from La La Land by the associate nurse director, keyword nurse, of the infusion center so she could scold me for being late. Yes, you heard that correctly. And yes, again, she is an RN. There was no reason to wake me. And I told her that as, there was no emergency. This conversation could have been had at another time. Before you ask, this associate nurse director was aware of the fact that I was extremely unwell that day, but she did not care. Her only concern was her agenda to chastise me. In that moment, I was not viewed as a human, but as a quote, naughty little Black girl who needed to be reprimanded. During our interaction, I let her know I would not be having the conversation she was trying to have with me while I was under the influence of Benadryl and had just been sound asleep. I also asked her where her compassion was as an RN for a sick, sleeping patient. Although I told her I was not going to have that conversation, or any conversation for that matter, she continued to terrorize me with her words anyway. I then said, and I quote, "I created a boundary and I need you not to push back on that." Do you think she stopped talking and walked away? Nope. She completely disregarded my boundary and proceeded to continue bullying me. She knew I was unable to get up from the infusion chair to move away from her. So in order to enforce my boundary and make her leave me alone, I did the only thing I could do at the time. I literally stuck my fingers in my ears like a toddler and closed my eyes. Do you think that was the end of that? Of course not. Following our interaction, that woman made it so I could no longer get my infusions at the Cedars Ambulatory Infusion Center. Now, remember, I had been getting my infusions there for 4 years, twice a month. So, her perception was, how dare I, a Black woman, have the audacity to advocate for myself and set a firm boundary? So she made sure I was punished, as is often the case when Black people, particularly Black women, stand up for themselves against people who clearly view us as less than human. I definitely wish I knew at the beginning of my illness that being a healthcare professional was not going to make me immune to medical racism. And yes, that associate nurse director knew I am a nurse. I'm sure most of you watching this are dumbfounded right now, and I didn't even share every detail about what went down, but this is the reality of being a Black woman accessing healthcare in this country, healthcare professional or not. Okay, now after that really heavy example, I'm going to end on a lighter note. The third and final thing I wish I knew early on, and this is a big one, and that is that fellow patients in the chronic illness community, even if they don't have your exact same illness, are often far better resources than anyone, including healthcare professionals. Chronic illness warriors are so knowledgeable, helpful, validating, compassionate, and empathetic, just to name a few. I personally am happy to help new members of the chronic illness community in any way I can. I can be found on Instagram or Twitter. My handle on both platforms is @AshantiRN. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime. We are all in this together. Thank you.
Wow, Ashanti, thank you for those amazing comments and some really great insights. I'd love to turn it over to Jalen now to round out our topic of the medical perspective.
Yeah, hello everyone. Good morning to those who are here. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Ashanti, for your advice and story. That was amazing. I was diagnosed with ME/CFS in September of 2020. And I guess just want to start with why I was probably asked to speak today. So I was presenting symptoms or started presenting symptoms at the beginning of 2019. Before that, I was an inpatient nurse in my early 20s, living my best life. I had some odd symptoms here and there, like you grow up with, but really consider myself healthy. Started presenting symptoms and really started declining pretty quickly. Was sleeping 16 hours out of nowhere, just really random stuff. I started seeing all these different specialists. And really people were telling me things were abnormal. Some tests were coming back, but no one could really give me a full diagnostic picture of what was going on. I ended up having a stroke-like event at work in the middle of that same year. I got to the ER. And after 12 hours, they told me I was having an anxiety attack. And when I asked what were the symptoms that were needed, like if this happened again, when should I come back, if I should call 911, and they told me if I found myself unconscious, and that's what they told my family. So we left. I, at that point, fought before we left for an outpatient neurology appointment. Before that appointment, I fought to have MRI imaging done of my spine, my brain, which I did get. And then when I got to that appointment, the provider told me that they had read my scans, but that they were diagnosing me with conversion disorder, which is now known as functional neurologic disorder. For those of you who may not know, that disorder, you present physical or sensory symptoms when you do not have an underlying neurological condition. And a lot of times it's associated with a mental health condition. So from there, I was sent to psychiatry, where I spent 6 months with them, the whole time declining rapidly. Multiple psychiatrists saw me and said they did not feel like I had conversion disorder. They sent letters and spoke with the neurologist, rheumatologist, different specialists I had seen to ask that I be worked up further, and was declined. That 6-month period where I was seeing psychiatry, I actually started referring myself out to different specialists and was getting to appointments, and people, the providers, after, doing their little assessment, were sitting down with me and saying, well, we're really sorry, but there's nothing further we can do for you. And it was really confusing to me because I was showing up with all of these symptoms and abnormal testing and wasn't really getting anywhere. At that time, the system I was in didn't have a patient portal, so they didn't have clinic notes you could see, so I was requesting them. When we finally started looking at the clinic notes, that's when I realized I was being blacklisted as a patient pretty much. Providers were seeing the diagnosis of conversion disorder, anxiety, and pretty much just saying, we're not going to take you as a patient, or there's nothing we can really do for you. At that point, I made the decision to go out of state because I was having gait issues. My walking was affected. My speech was affected. I was having choking episodes, multiple things going on. So I decided to go to a national diagnostic program out of state. They were luckily able to diagnose me with POTS, but they couldn't give me an answer for everything else going on. From there, I was referred to Johns Hopkins Chronic Fatigue Syndrome Clinic, and it literally changed my life in a couple months. And that in one visit was where I was diagnosed with EDS and mast cell and ME/CFS and all of these things. And we're told, oh, you also need to see a neurosurgeon like now. And then in that next month, I actually was told I needed immediate spinal fusion surgery. And I'm happy to say, waking up from that surgery, most of my neurological symptoms were gone. So what my advice, I wish I would have known, what I would give to someone is specifically in regards to delays in treatment or diagnosis, especially with the energy limiting disability and saving yourself time. starting with support groups, local or regional. If you've been in one that maybe you didn't feel inclusive in or that it was a good fit for you, try another one. Usually support groups, a lot of them will have doctors or providers lists that they put together for their local providers that are super helpful for providers who will treat you with great bedside manner, and even will have some to avoid, unfortunately, and that is the case. The second I would say is if you find yourself in a medical system, so the same hospitals all under one name, I won't list any names, but get out of that system. So if you're finding you're running up against a wall and you're not really getting anywhere, providers aren't further treating you, try to move into a different system and see if that helps anything. The third I would say is if you have any CFS Long Covid clinics in your area, I know the appointment and wait lists are insane now, but at least just get on the list. That resource is beyond beneficial to have with you. And then this is a little bit out of left field, but a lot of expert clinicians, sometimes if you Google, you search their LinkedIn, if you find that they're doing research or things that you feel like you would benefit from treatment, finding their emails and emailing them and saying, hey, I have this going on, I'm running into a brick wall with these things. Do you have any recommendations or a provider you could refer? You'd be surprised how many people have gotten with that. So those are my recommendations. And really at the end of the day, believe in yourself. You are also an expert in the room that you're in about your body and yourself. So always remember that. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Jalen. What a powerful story. I'm so excited to hear more from your perspective as we get to the question section. But in the meantime, we'll shift over to our professional conversation. And I'm so pleased to be joined by two amazing folks who some may need no introduction. But I'm first introducing Laura Casey, is the research editor at WSJ, WSJ Magazine, and writes about disability and other topics for the Wall Street Journal and WSJ. She held a 2022 WSJ Trust Fellowship focused on disability coverage. Laura joined WSJ in 2016. She previously worked as a reporter, researcher, and research editor primarily at Condé Nast and Hearst titles, including Self and Teen Vogue, where she covered health, food, design, entertainment, art, fashion, and technology. She has been disabled since birth and began journalism career as an investigative magazine at City Limits. Laura has graduated from Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism and is based in New York City. Laura Casey, thank you so much for joining us. She's also joined by, in our professional session, Allison Sabrana, who is a disability advocate based in Fort Collins, Colorado, living with ME/CFS and other chronic conditions caused by a viral infection in 2014. She is passionate about helping chronically ill people understand disability rights and navigates barriers about accessing medical care and benefits as a former care coordinator for Colorado's Medicaid program. Allison is actively involved in direct peer support and long COVID policy advocacy as a board member of Body Politic, which is a health justice organization working to break down barriers to patient-driven whole person care through a global network of COVID-19 patients, chronic illness allies, and disability advocates. Before her illness, Allison worked in communications while performing regularly as a classical flutist in small ensembles and orchestra. Laura and Allison, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. I am disabled. I do have post-viral illness, so today I'm here to talk about my reporting and what I've learned about that. I recently did a piece about accommodations in the workplace. Obviously, under the ADA, if you are disabled or if you have a perceived disability, you are entitled to reasonable accommodations. This includes in the workplace, it includes elsewhere. I'm going to focus on the workplace. I want to emphasize, number one, accommodations are not a favor or special treatment. They are your civil rights. Disclosing your disability status and asking for accommodations early in your illness or early in your employment before your condition can affect your performance can be extremely helpful and give you peace of mind. Once you start the accommodations conversation at work, you have the protection of the ADA and the process to address discrimination should it happen. I can talk about that in more detail in the breakout session later. It can be difficult to know whether to disclose at work. While it's helpful for many people and does provide legal protections, there's no guarantees that your company will ensure a seamless process or agree to the accommodations that you believe are reasonable and necessary. Also, I want to acknowledge that the more marginalized identities one has, the higher the risk of discrimination. So if you're a disabled person of color or LGBTQ, or an immigrant or any other marginalized identity, you really might have to make considerations that, your colleagues might not. But again, you are still protected by the ADA and you still do have recourse if you believe you've been discriminated against. This comes up, frequently in a recent 2022 survey by Inclusively, an online job search platform for disabled workers. Workers of color who face higher rates of long COVID or more than twice as likely than white employees, 35% versus 15%, to be unsure about their rights or their company's process, and were nearly twice as likely, 30% versus 15%, to say they were afraid of, afraid of the response they might get if they asked. So those are additional concerns that people might have. And it's up to you how you approach to ask for accommodations. Some companies have a formal HR process, but at most workplaces, you can approach the person you think would be the best to have that initial conversation with, whether that's your direct supervisor or HR or some other authority figure. You can do it orally, you can do it in writing. The initial approach is to start the conversation. The ADA is written so that the accommodations process is a back and forth conversation between you and your employer. You discuss what would best serve you, what they're able to offer. And research has shown that more than half of accommodations cost nothing, and the rest typically have a cost of $500. Many employers and employees are unfamiliar with the process, may worry about the cost, not realizing that it is minimal. But the Job Accommodation Network, a service funded by the US Department of Labor, has found that accommodations costs have remained at this level since they began collecting data 19 years ago. You also do not have to disclose every disability or condition you have when you ask for accommodations, only the one or ones for which you're asking for accommodations. You can always ask for accommodations for other disabilities later. And if your disability isn't apparent, like with many energy-limiting illnesses like ME and other post-viral conditions like POTS or mast cell activation syndrome, your employer can ask for documentation related to the condition you're seeking to accommodate, like a letter from a medical professional. But this can come from any number of qualified medical professionals. It could be a physician, a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, community health worker, a mental health therapist, a nurse practitioner, and others. There's a wide variety. And the documentation can be as detailed or as vague as it needs to be. Naming the specific diagnosis is not always required. And can depend on your comfort level. The purpose is to document the need for accommodations, not to provide ICD codes for, an insurance reimbursement. Your employer will typically look to you to suggest the specific accommodations you'll need. And that can be kind of daunting, since the kinds of things we've been taught to think of as accommodations tend to be things like equipment, which is not always the most relevant accommodation for people with energy limiting illness. In reality, most accommodations across the board involve a policy change, like the ability to work from home, to take frequent breaks, or to work flexible hours. Luckily, there's a wealth of information on the topic. The Job Accommodation Network has an extremely thorough website called Ask Jan, Jan, and they offer suggestions based on specific disabilities under its accommodations search suggestion. It is extraordinarily detailed, super helpful. They also offer general advice about the process throughout the site and individual advice for either you or your employer through an 800 number, or for employers, they also offer a chat. The ADA National Network is another service that offers extensive info for both employees and employers online, as well as advice via phone and even in person at ADA regional centers. But beyond those sites and other services for disabled adults, like centers for independent living, which you can find in major metropolitan areas, every expert and patient I spoke to reiterated how helpful it is to lean on your disability community. Ask in online support groups, ask people you know in real life, ask colleagues that you're comfortable with, and on social media for what has helped other people, because crowdsourcing this is a really helpful way to do it. A lot of people with energy limiting illnesses often have imposter syndrome and don't realize that accommodations are for them too. Whether you think they're for other people because you're only familiar with more visible accommodations, or you don't think you deserve them because you've been invalidated by your family, your friends, your doctors, just recognize that that's not true. Like, you have civil rights like everyone else. And even though your accommodations might look different from, say, someone who needs a screen reader or someone who needs an ergonomic chair, they're still valid. There's still, things you can ask for. And, a lot of times, my sources had told me that they, despite knowing their rights, they still had a sense of shame or stigma and waited too long to ask for accommodations. They had wished that they had asked sooner so that there wasn't as much stress about feeling like they were doing a bad job at work, or as much concern about finally having to disclose and ask. It can be difficult to get over the stigma or the fear, but accommodating yourself can really be life-changing, and being creative in those accommodations is highly possible when it comes to energy limiting illness. So thanks.
Thank you so much. Those were amazing comments. And just noting that the conversation going on in the chat, please note that those resources and those links were shared in the chat as well. And Allison, would you please join us to talk about your guidance for navigating the professional space?
Yeah, can you see my screen okay?
Yes,
Awesome.
coming through.
Okay. So I have been disabled by post-viral ME/CFS and related conditions like POTS and mast cell activation for 9 years now. I got sick in April 2014, and I've had an interesting and difficult journey with work, and I wanted to share some of what I learned today, and particularly the number one most important thing that if I could go back in time and teach my younger self, this is what I would tell them, which is that I have a disability now, and there are services and rights that protect me. And my disability might not look like what I previously thought disability looked like, but nonetheless, I still have a disability, and therefore I'm entitled to use those services and be protected by those civil rights protections. Embracing this and understanding this earlier would have reduced a lot of harm that I experienced trying to work jobs without requesting accommodations and being unable to do them, and trying to just job hop until I found the right job that naturally accommodated me. And that ultimately was not successful. I couldn't even sustain a part-time office job with a power assist wheelchair. And I did not know that I could request accommodations and that I could get services to help me. So that's what I want to talk about today. As you can see here in these pictures, I have a fluctuating dynamic disability, like many of us with ME/CFS and related conditions do. In these pictures here, you can see that in one, I am standing and I appear completely normal and non-disabled, and in the next, taken just minutes apart from each other, I am visibly disabled. So my experience living with ME/CFS, I have a dynamic fluctuating disability that still counts as a disability. That still means that you can access services and supports for you and be protected by disability rights. So the spoon theory is something I think a lot of people in our community talk about. If you're not familiar, essentially the idea of it is that one spoon represents sort of a unit of energy. Different activities require different amounts of energy. And in the conversation that we're having about work takes a whole lot of spoons. Like I said, in my earlier years of illness, the first 4 years, I tried to push myself to work. I also was not properly diagnosed yet. And it was really not successful. It got to the point where I was not bathing enough. I was not wearing clean clothes enough. I was not eating enough because I was prioritizing all of my spoons just to get to work. So you can see in this chart here that, you know, if I got out of bed and got dressed and took my medication and then made and ate breakfast and then went to work, or I drove to work first, I would have been out of my energy for the day before I could even start my work shift. That's why work was unsuccessful for me in the first 4 years of illness. It's what led to my ME/CFS progressing and becoming moderate, because I was pushing myself too much, using too many spoons that I didn't have so that I could continue working, because I did not have the support that I need. Spoiler alert, 9 years in now, I am getting the services and supports that I need, and I'm able to start working part-time again. So you might be asking, what services and supports are those? They are Medicaid long-term services and supports. And you can see here, I took this straight from Medicaid.gov, the government website, that Medicaid long-term services and supports are for people with disabling conditions and chronic illnesses to help us meet our daily needs. And I feel very strongly that if someone with ME/CFS or any of our related conditions, if you're struggling with day-to-day activities, you should be able to access these services and supports. So when I say struggling with day-to-day activities, what do I mean? This is a long list of things here that I won't read off today, but it's essentially activities of daily living and instrumental activities of daily living. Particularly the instrumental activities of daily living, like going to doctor appointments, planning and preparing meals, doing housework, shopping for groceries, things like that, can be so demanding for us on our energy. And this is really where I needed a lot of help, and I know a lot of people in our community would benefit from help, as well as the activities of daily living, like bathing safely. If you have POTS and you're a fall risk while you're in the shower, you know, you deserve to have help that you need to make it safe for you to do that. So what does this have to do with work? When I was trying to work the first 4 years that I had ME/CFS, I didn't have any of this kind of support other than like what maybe some friends were able to provide for me, and that just wasn't enough. This is actually a copy of how my case manager calculates how many hours of care that I need, and I need 35 hours a week of support just to get me up to like a normal level. So no wonder I was not successful in working, because I required 35 hours a week of care just to be able to be at the baseline to even think about working. That's why I was in a spoon deficit, energy deficit all the time. If you know a little bit about Medicaid, you might be asking yourself, okay, well, if I'm going to get services to make work possible for me, aren't I going to lose Medicaid once I start working and then lose access to those services that make working possible? To which my answer is there are special Medicaid programs for people with disabilities. And this is an area, again, where if I had understood sooner that I counted as having a disability, I could have gotten help sooner. Once I got on this program, first of all, a lot of my medical bills stopped, like from ER visits and stuff like that. But also then it did give me access to long-term services and supports where I pay a premium of $25 a month, and just my long-term services and supports alone, I get $3,000 a month worth of benefits from that. So really briefly, I just want to acknowledge that I know that services like the ones I've been talking about and also legal protections can be difficult to access. They're not enough. They're not equitably accessible. I know that. I promise you I know that. And I also know that there is a network of disability activists working every day towards bettering these things. When I'm talking about these programs today, I just want you to know that because we're talking about individual experiences navigating energy limiting chronic illnesses, we all have to figure out how to survive with what things are available, the civil rights protections that are available right now, while we trust other disability activists to push for change, to make it easier in the future and for the next generations of people with ME/CFS. So if you are interested in getting support like what I've talked about, I really recommend you connect with your Centers for Independent Living. If you've watched Crip Camp, you can see some of the stories behind how Centers for Independent Living started. And also look for your aging and disability resource centers. It's specifically their job to help you, counsel you on long-term services and supports and what your options are, as well to help you apply for them. So there is help available to help you access the programs that I'm talking about. And then lastly, I have to mention the How to Get On site. It's a fantastic resource. It can help explain how to access a lot of the programs I've talked about today. And it's written specifically for an audience of people with ME/CFS, written by one of our peers. And it's an extremely awesome resource. Highly recommend. So that's all I have for right now.
Thank you so much, Allison. Really helpful information, and I'm so thrilled to have brought that amazing work. And we have to dive more into the question section because I have so many questions I want to ask you. But we'll go on to the last, but most certainly not least, in terms of the topics that we deal with as people with energy and limiting disabilities every day, and that is the personal life and your home life. So I'm so pleased to bring to you two amazing speakers from two exceptional backgrounds. I have Amy Mooney, who is an occupational therapist in private practice, specializing in therapeutic care for individuals with chronic conditions involving post-exertional malaise or post-exertion symptom exacerbation. That's PEM or PESE. Amy's pacing guide for PEM guidelines and therapeutic protocol have been featured in presentations at national and international conferences, in her continuing education programs for medical professionals, and patient advocacy webinars. As a caregiver for a loved one with ME/CFS, Amy understands firsthand the challenges individuals and families experience seeking appropriate care. Amy has a bachelor's degree from Loyola University Chicago and a master's degree in occupational therapy from Rush University Chicago. She is a returned Peace Corps officer who calls Chicago home. And also joining us is Dr. Sharon Stevenson, who has a DVM, PhD, and MBA, who has been working on with the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization since 2020, and has led the redevelopment and launch of Caring Info website. That's www.caringinfo.org. Sharon is a board-certified patient advocate with a particular interest in serious illness and end-of-life care. She is also the managing director of Acopi Venture Capital, which is co-founded in 2005, and responsible for the firm's life sciences investments. Sharon has received a certificate in patient advocacy from the UCLA Extension, an MBA from UCLA Anderson Graduate School of Management, a PhD in comparative pathology from UC Davis, and a Master of Science in veterinary pathology and a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine from the Ohio State University. Sharon and Amy, welcome so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I am really honored to be in this on this panel, and I really appreciate your all of the advocacy that Solve ME has been doing this week. So thank you very much. You're right. I've seen a lot of questions come up in the chat of what do we do about it? What does it mean? You tell us that we need to pace, we need to guard our spoons. This is really, it's really a hard thing to do. And I think that's the hardest part about understanding how to live with this disease is that understanding that pacing is not the same for everybody. And so as a healthcare provider, I have been trained and I really understand what it looks like to pace and to have a person come through with a medical condition that fits the box. I mean, you know exactly what you need to do. You put them through the run of the mill from a rehab center, rehab program. And they, after a certain amount of time, start showing improvement. And what's so frustrating is that people with ME try and they don't get the outcomes that everybody is expecting. And so it frustrates the provider and it frustrates the individual with the disease. I mean, it is really hard because people start blaming themselves for not being able to handle the situation. And I experienced this watching my loved one go through this and putting that blame back on themselves. And I tried to figure out how is it being misinterpreted? What is happening? How is the therapist not understanding? How is my loved one not expressing their needs? And I finally realized it's not the problem of understanding pacing. Actually, pacing doesn't meet the needs of this individual. And so I kind of went back to my drawing board and tried to figure out what is different about pacing for a person with just a general rehab issue, and what is pacing for a person that has a dysfunctional metabolic issue. And I think this is one of the key issues on why a lot of studies go wrong and patients get so frustrated. I mean, we see that the NIH is putting in a whole bunch of money, and some of the tests or some of the research is not pointing specifically to the issues that the people in the ME community and the long COVID community are yelling about. We're saying this needs to target the actual PEM. This needs to target post-exertional malaise. And I believe that the issue comes to be that the goal outcome is on the activity and it's not on the recovery. And so I would like to present to you guys some of my slides just to show you what that means to me and why I needed to kind of refocus and reassess what pacing for PEM truly looks like. So let me share my screen briefly, and I will hopefully be able to give you a little bit more information. So what I've come up with is that pacing is a strategy we use for managing exertion over time. And I've broken it down into 3 categories of pacing. One being pacing for individuals without significant health concerns. It's for when you're healthy and you're just maybe have a child and you haven't slept for a week. It's for an individual who maybe wants to go for a run but has to do work. And so it's just pacing your life for your exertion with a healthy body. And then we look at pacing for therapeutic strategy. And this is where I think a lot of the rehab centers, this is where they're stuck and they think that this is what pacing means. It's for somebody that has an intact metabolic system. They might need specific training on how to get through exertion with a new hip, or somebody that has had a stroke, or somebody that has some sort of brain injury. This is something that can be taught and replicated, and then the person goes on to live their life with this new strategy. But pacing for PEM is for individuals that have a broken metabolic system, and it is a complex system or way to look at how to pace. And it's for a disease of metabolic functioning. It's complex, it's specialized, and it's absolutely vital for managing tasks, exertion, and the recovery over time. And pacing for PEM, it must account for the exertion that is prior to the task, during the task, and also for post-task recovery. And pacing for PEM is a lifestyle, and it is a lifestyle for symptom management. So, let's see if I can. And this is what it looks like if we break it down. Pacing for PEM is first looking at the task analysis. And this is what OTs really get into. This is kind of our fun part of our job, is we look at tasks. And we look at what is it that you really must do, you might want to do, and you may do. What's your wish list? So your tasks are prioritizing your list. I really need to eat, and I really need to use the restroom or be able to some sort of toileting. I might take a shower. I might wash my hair. I might answer these emails. I may talk to a friend, or I may get my groceries. So those are the things that you need to start prioritizing. What's the to-do list? And then the activity analysis is the plan. What is it going to take with the energy that you have to get this task done? And how long is my energy envelope going to last? So those are the kind of the components that look at the task as a whole. And then finally looking at the adaptations and the modifications that are needed to be able to support the activities. And this is where some help is needed, because you don't know what tools are out there. OTs and physical therapists can also get into this topic, but this isn't necessarily what they're really trained to engage in. But OTs are, and that's where finding a good OT is important, but not vital that this therapist needs to know everything about the disease itself. As long as you find somebody that is open to learning and understanding your condition as a whole, this is where I think you can get a little bit of help, because there are not therapists that are trained in ME or long COVID with PEM. But if you find somebody that is open to learn, they can start visualizing what your support is needed. And then also looking at generally, what are the stressors of your activity? Because not every activity is going to be a low intensity stressor. Being at home in your room or in a quiet, restful place, you can control what the lights are like, what your sounds are like, your smells, your touch, all of the sensory components. But when you are maybe at the grocery store, it's harder to control. So understanding what the stressors are for the task or the activity can help you prepare for making the decisions of what your energy envelope has in store for, or in stock for you to be able to use or expend. So looking at what kind of sensory activity stressors are going to be involved through sensory, cognitive, physical, and social emotional. So just briefly, those are some of the stressors that I think that you can start looking at for each task that is going to be on your to-do list. And then looking at the activity analysis is, what is it going to take to get this task done? What's the time involved? Is doing something in the middle of the day better than in the evening? Or is something that I can do every other day or every other week? Just timing out when you can perform a certain task gives you a little bit more control over when you make your choices, because that's what it all comes down to. Is once you have more choice in your life, you start building quality of life back again. Somebody that has very severe ME can still have improved quality of life. And by giving them control over when they do something or how it's done, gives them more joy, more purpose, more meaning in their activities. So just looking at the time, the physical piece, and I'm going to break it down very briefly, the environment, and then the adaptations and modifications. So just briefly, I won't go through all of this. This is just examples for somebody that has severe ME. Body washing. Is it every other day? Is it every other week? Is it one body part at a time? And when during the day is their optimal point? Looking at the physical piece, the environment, light, sounds, vision, smell, and then the adaptations and modifications, using unscented soaps, using towels instead of having to get dressed right away. So this is just an example for body washing. And then in an article that I was co-writing with Jose Montoya, Mary Deming, and a whole group of others, we wrote about caring for an individual with severe ME. And these are just some very basic outlines of what you can do for modifications and adaptations. And then I just wrote down, I brainstormed just what it might look like for bathing for a person with moderate ME, using that same framework. Just looking at what the physical events, what are they going to use, a shower chair or use just the bathtub for positioning, putting their feet up in reclined position as much as you can, just to give the body as much blood and circulation and controlling autonomics as possible. And then again, here's some modifications and adaptations, just to get some ideas of how to start giving individuals a little bit more support in their life. And then we can get into this later with pacing for PEM. This is pretty much what I just talked about. What are your symptoms? What are your priority lists? What are you going to do with your tasks that make it meaningful and purposeful for your life? And then looking at time, physical, environment, and then the modifications. And here's just a spreadsheet for you for reference. All of my notes, all of my slides are going to be provided on the Solve ME site. So don't worry about having to take screenshots or anything, but you can have access to this. And then I also have a website you can look at to see if you have any more questions. You can reach out to me directly at otforme.com. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. This so helpful. And again, those slides will be available for download on either the Solve ME website, or you can view this recording on YouTube to go back and review that section again. And last but most certainly not least, Dr. Sharon Stevenson, I'm so pleased to bring you to the conversation and share some of your insights about how managing with energy limiting disabilities can affect your personal life.
Okay, thank you. I've always sort of said I'm overeducated for anything actually useful, but I think since with the Caring Info website, I'm actually feeling like that may in fact be useful. Just a little bit about where I'm coming from. Most of my background is in caregiving. At this point, I have a husband with advanced Alzheimer's disease. I've been caring for him for 10 years and with an indefinite, horizon going forward. So Caring Info came about. I conceptualized the US healthcare system as an incredibly unfriendly cafeteria. You have to eat, but no one in that cafeteria is going to tell you what's in the food. They're not going to tell you how much it costs. No one's going to help you with your tray, but yet you still have to navigate it. And so we wanted to put together the best kind of information we could to allow people to be as empowered as they can be based on information to deal with the healthcare system. This is going to be a bit of confetti. One of the speakers talked a fair amount about Medicaid. Just to remind you, Medicaid, while it's a federal program, it's administered at the state level. And so you will need to understand what is offered in your state, and that varies greatly. Now, we have a whole long page. I'll quit advertising caringinfo.org, but we have a whole huge kind of section on Medicaid and people that will help you apply for it and that kind of thing, and links to the various states' offices. Another thing I want to talk about is having someone or someones that may be able to speak for you when it's being difficult for you to speak for yourself. Now, that could be, a patient advocate, but it can be a friend. And the advantage of having a healthcare durable power of attorney for that person, so they can speak on your behalf. And I say durable in the sense that there's two kinds, there's springing and there's durable. Springing requires you to have a letter from a physician or a healthcare professional saying that you are unable to speak on your own behalf, which is an extra step and that makes it much more difficult to use. Obviously, the durable allows the person to speak for you. They never have the authority to speak for you as long as you are able to speak for yourself. But it does help in dealing with the healthcare system and getting people to talk to your agent or the person that might be helping you out. The other thing, we come at this also from a caregiving standpoint. And of course, I was thinking about it when I was listening to everybody else. I mean, all of the sort of categories of caregiving are exactly the same, whether you're doing it for someone else or you're doing it for yourself. And I found it interesting in putting this information together for the website. There's a structure, if you will, of what the tasks are of caregiving, not specifically in the sense that Allison was just doing, but categories of personal, meaning direct caregiving, changing bandages, helping do grooming. There's the physical environment, which is washing the sheets, buying food, keeping the house clean. Interestingly enough, there's a whole category about nurturing community and connections. And I mean, I, for instance, communicate with my husband's children on his behalf, and that takes time. And then administrative, the ever popular, dealing with the healthcare system, with insurance companies, with PBMs and the like. Financial, which is very big and takes a huge amount of time. And then lastly, and completely not least, self-care. And I found that to be a very useful construct because honestly, I wasn't counting the administrative stuff or the financial stuff as actually being part of caregiving. It was just something that needed to be done. And it helped me understand the amount of time I was spending. And it kind of speaks to some of the other speakers when they talk about there's this whole huge list of stuff to do. And how do you prioritize what's important? I also think it's useful, as I'm sure we have all experienced, kind of everybody has a point of view and everybody can tell you what would be good for you or tell you what you need. And I found it useful to develop a script. So when someone is offering unsolicited advice, I actually have kind of a go-to, thank you very much. I really appreciate your interest, kind of moving right along. And it really did help to have kind of a list of 2 or 3 things that I might turn to say, as opposed to standing there, with your eyes large and inhaling and kind of like, oh, I can't believe they just said that. The other thing is, and I know you're probably all doing this, but organize, and simplify. I mean, one of the best things ever is auto pay if you happen to have electronic banking, because then you don't have to worry about is it the 15th of the month or not. There's a lot of software out there and some apps that are incredibly useful in just eliminating, some of the time that needs to be spent. And I guess lastly, I'd just like to talk about, the small pleasures, finding time and space just to be. And that is incredibly true, whether you're the patient or the you know, the person that's receiving care or the person that's giving care, it is really easy, really easy to lose your identity and your sense of self in all of this activity, and keeping track of all of these things and dealing with all of these people. And I mean, the healthcare system is just brutal. And to find, you know, whether it's the cup of coffee in the morning, you know, whatever it is that speaks to you and your sense of yourself, to make sure that's fairly high on the list of things you give some priority to, and let perhaps some other things go. So that's, I'm short of time, but that's my immediate wisdom, so to speak.
Thank you so much. And that is some excellent wisdom. And I've definitely used caringinfo.org for my caregiving journey, and it is incredibly valuable. So I highly encourage folks to take a look. If you have any questions, your answer will probably be there. If not, we can get to it during the breakout sessions. So we have just about 20 minutes left. And I'd love to transition to our roundtable discussion. I'm going to ask one question per category and start with the speakers in that category, but then invite conversation and input from the speakers in other categories as well. So we're going to go in reverse order. We're going to start with the personal. And so speaking of the personal, one thing that we really touched on in these conversations around energy and limiting disabilities is decision making. It's, do I take a shower or do I prepare a meal? Do I take a job or do I heal? Right? Decision making is critical to folks with energy limiting disabilities. So I'm looking to Dr. Sharon Stevenson and to Amy Mooney. Any advice you have from that kind of decision making perspective? How can you, or do you have any maybe mechanisms or systems to make that difficult choice and decision making an easier process for people with energy limiting disabilities?
Since I was just speaking, I'll go ahead. I'm a big fan of paper and pen or pencil, and a big fan of like, okay, what are the pros of this decision? What are the cons of this decision? What am I afraid of? What am I excited by? And when you do that, honestly, I mean, this is more for bigger decisions, but it becomes pretty clear which quadrants are the biggest and the longest to help decide. I absolutely, I think the worst possible thing that, well, I'm exaggerating, but a really bad thing that people do is what I call decision making by committee. They ask this person, and then they ask that person, and then they ask somebody else, and you get like 6 different conflicting opinions, and then you kind of maybe want to please that person because, you know, and on it goes. Don't do that. Nothing useful comes of that as far as I'm concerned.
That's really helpful. So center yourself and your own needs and take a moment to sort of contextualize the prioritization of what you want to do and kind of look at those pros and cons. Thank you so much, Sharon. That's some really helpful advice. Amy, do you want to jump in on this topic?
Yeah, and I think that I will go off of that too, because I also agree that writing things down and keeping things in your focus needs to happen. You need to understand that what you did last week is probably still in your body's system, that you need to give yourself a little room for grace, because what you did was important last week or however long ago it takes to recover from PEM. I think we have to remember that PEM is a delayed response. So even though you're finished with that event, your body has a really bad long memory that you're still trying to deal with. So I think giving yourself that grace and take away a little bit of guilt from your future decisions, just to give yourself a little bit more of a space for feeling proud of what you did. But then also, I think figuring out I'm an occupational therapist. I want to know what your occupations are. So keeping things purposeful and meaningful to your life. You are not necessarily made to be an exercise person. So you do not need to put exercise on your list as a priority when your daily activity is your exercise. So you can actually move and strengthen your body with reaching for items. And I think just giving yourself a little bit more grace for this is not the body that you were necessarily wanting to be in, but this is the body you have. And so giving yourself that space. But I also think that just coming up with priorities and putting your lists together to figure out what is it that I really want to do and what do I need to get off of my shoulders, such as delegating to other people, or even being able to put it off to, that's something that I don't want to do. I'm not going to do those things anymore.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Sharon. Really important ideas. And I'd love to invite the rest of the panel. Were there any other thoughts on that topic that folks wanted to jump in on the topic of decision making? No problem. Thank you so much for your input. So now moving on to the professional topic and moving to our professional space, looking at Laura from your research and reporting, and Allison from managing this with such grace and dignity, because we all know your work and we all know that you have done some exceptional work. So looking to you both from those different perspectives, what is the one accommodation that everyone has a right to, or most people with energy limiting disabilities have a right to, that most people don't know they have a right to? What's kind of the surprise accommodation that most people don't realize you have a right to ask for? And you can go in any order you want, but I'm going to pick on you, Laura, first, if you'd like to jump in, especially because your recent article talked about a lot of different accommodations, and there's one that really stood out.
I would say that asking for flexibility is definitely the one that people are very afraid to ask for, but that ultimately supervisors realize very quickly, hey, this works to everybody's benefit, and it's really not that big of a deal depending on the position. I want to acknowledge, and this came up in the chat, obviously certain industries are bad at accommodating. Certain things have changed since the pandemic, actually, also, I would say. But I think the flexibility piece is something that really does benefit both employee and employer. And people usually end up being much happier with what happens from that than they anticipate.
Flexibility, something that seems so basic and yet isn't very intimidating. I totally agree. Allison, do you want to jump in and share your thoughts about how to navigate that space?
Sure. I think remote work is a pretty obvious one, and unfortunately, I hear from a lot of people whose accommodation request for that is denied nowadays, which is really a systems problem that needs to be addressed. So I'm actually going to say for like accommodations they wouldn't expect, I think that sometimes equipment can be overlooked for us because we don't have a visible disability. And I don't know if you can tell right now, I had a quick picture in my slide, but I have like an accessible setup here where I'm reclined and my feet are up while I'm on my computer. It's really hard for people to sit up with their feet down on the floor for our community. And that's the typical office work position. So I would say adaptive, like computer equipment or chair setup, workstation setup.
Fantastic. And I'm so glad you mentioned that. When we during the Solve ME You and Me registry, when we were looking at how to collect data on triggering events for post-exertional malaise, one of the metrics we use is hours of feet on the floor, and we specify that that includes when you're sitting upright and your feet are on the floor and you're typing at a computer, because that can be a triggering space. So I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that reclining position, and if you can get perhaps a reclining wheelchair or as Allison said, a reclining workspace, something that can make you be comfortable and active in that reclining position, could be really game changing. So thank you so much for pointing that out. That's a key area for people with energy limiting disabilities. For our last question, I'm going to move on to the medical space, bringing Jalen and Ashanti back into the conversation. So there's a couple different aspects of the medical system that we've talked about and how challenging they can be. But it seems clear that having a partnership with your medical provider is key, and having a medical provider that will listen to you and work with you and hear you out. So do you have any tips or tricks, especially having both of you been one of those medical providers? What's a way that patients can sort of, any tips for navigating that conversation, for how to even begin to you know, it just seems like staring at a person and saying, I have a disability. Like, how do you get those words out? Like, any tips or tricks for how to navigate that conversation to build that health partnership with your provider?
Do you want to take that one?
I'll go first. So I would say one of the things that super helps, having a trusted person at your appointments or even over FaceTime, to be kind of your second voice and ears, to speak up when you can't. I always like to say 2 words going into appointments: expectations and honesty can get you very far. So being very honest with your symptoms, where you are, and then just setting up expectations with the provider. So I usually go into all my appointments with kind of 3 pages of like a medications list, my diagnosis, allergies, previous surgeries and procedures, and then a current updated providers list. That does a lot of the talking for me when I don't have to, because our care can be so complex. And then just setting up just like expectations or a plan for what you expect out of the care, and just kind of having that conversation back and forth with the provider, I think usually kind of gets them on a different brainwave, instead of like just talking at you as a patient, kind of developing that conversation back and forth with the provider about what you expect from their care.
Fabulous. So that was a medication list, a list of allergies, and a list of past procedures and surgeries. Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ashanti, did you want to add anything?
No, I think Jalen covered it. Thank you, Jalen.
Got it. I'm just sharing that in the chat for everybody. Very helpful. So I know that brings us to almost that time, but I'll ask one last question for the panel. We've talked about a lot of different aspects, and we've talked about a lot of different parts of people's daily lives. This is very real for folks, from the personal of how to bathe, to the professional of how to work and survive, and to the medical of how to get care. So one thing that I'd say brings all this together is the interconnectedness between these things. How your personal life touches your medical life, touches your professional life. So if there's one takeaway from all of this, from all of these great conversations so far, it feels like giving authenticity to your self-knowledge and authenticity to what you're experiencing. So I'd love to ask the final question is, what's the best way that you all would recommend being authentic to yourself, and any suggestions about how to self-acknowledge where you're at, and how to bring all of that to everything we talked about when you're dealing with your personal care?
I'd like to just say something really quickly. Just
please.
Yourself. Do not gaslight yourself. I think oftentimes when we are accessing the healthcare system, doctors don't believe us. We are being gaslit by them. So it's really important to trust yourself and know that what you're experiencing is real, it is valid, and don't allow any of these doctors or anyone else to gaslight you. And yeah.
Hear, hear.
Could I would like to add echo that and say also, recognize that just because someone else said this, and I apologize, I don't remember who it was, because your disabilities don't look like other people's doesn't mean that they are not just as affecting, or that they don't deserve accommodation as much. Really looking for places in your life where you can accommodate is just so important, and making sure that you validate yourself over and over and over until you are really advocating for yourself in all of these spaces we discussed.
Absolutely, Laura. Thank you. Any other thoughts that folks would like to add to that? I see Amy kind of jumping in.
Here I've got, I just want to also give people the power to, when you do advocate yourself, that means that you can also officially or unofficially fire people from your life. that you do not necessarily need to have people in your life that are going to constantly disbelieve you. And
Whoop.
She's muted.
Amy, you're on mute.
sorry, I'm sorry. So I guess I would just to say that somehow I'd like to make sure that you have the ability to empower with being able to fire people. If people are definitely bringing you down, you can take time to put a pause on that relationship, or even fire medical providers from your life if they're really not giving you the care that you really are deserving. So that's my piece, is like, you do deserve care, and do not second guess yourself because you're not making this up. This is something that's true.
Absolutely. Being
I'm
honest,
probably-
genuine with yourself. Oh, sorry, please jump in.
Yeah, I'll probably say what everybody else is saying, just in a slightly different way. It's just like everybody has expectations. You know, there's this role, you're supposed to do that. It's supposed to look like this. And being able, you know, to step away from those and just have those moments. I think somebody else used the word of authenticity. I mean, I do practice yoga, and I do kind of just sit quietly and breathe and just kind of get to the center of me, and to know that, you know, this is my one and only life, and I'm me, and I might not look like anybody else or might not do things differently, but it's all okay. It's that bit of grace someone talked about earlier. We are each little units of grace, and embracing that we are exactly that.
Fantastic. So we have just a few minutes left and we're wrapping up. So before we end, I just wanted to share one final thought that I really think wraps up the whole experience of these very amazing expertise, amazing lived experience. All of our panelists, thank you so much. You have brought so much wisdom and learned lived experience to this community through many different ways. And my final thought is, as I was flying to DC for the events this week, I was watching on the plane a film about Mr. Rogers. You'll see I've been wearing my red sweater and sort of tribute to him. Mr. Rogers was definitely a hero in my life as a kid, and I think to many people. And one of my favorite quotes from Mr. Rogers is the following: "If it's human, it's mentionable. And if it's mentionable, it's manageable. Talk about it." And I think that's what we did here, is we talked about it. So I encourage you all to continue talking in our breakout sessions that are coming up. If we could throw the slide on the screen really quickly. Thank you, Amanda. We have just our final announcements today. World ME Day is coming up on May 12th. So there's some really great ways to get involved. Check out our social media or our website for more ways to learn how to #learn from ME, especially post-exertional malaise and its management. And lastly, if you want to continue the conversation with these great speakers and this really amazing panel, if we could do one more slide forward, please, with the breakout sessions. I just want to walk through.
Sorry, changing screens, one moment.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, Amanda. Just walk through that you can continue the conversation and join these speakers during our breakout session beginning at 1 p.m. Eastern, going for 45 minutes each. There we are. So at 1 o'clock to 1:45 is Navigating the Home Life Roundtable with Amy Mooney and Dr. Sharon Stevenson, who I believe is not going to join for the whole time, but part of it. And then you'll have a 15-minute break, and we'll come back for Navigating the Workplace Roundtable with Laura Casey and Allison Sabrana. And then another 15-minute break, and the last ending of the day of the 3 p.m. session to 3:45, Navigating the Medical Challenges Roundtable with Jalen and Ashanti. So again, thank you so much all for your time, for joining us in this very important. The link to join the roundtable conversation is a different Zoom link, is available in the chat there. We hope you'll join us. And just one last note, the Zoom roundtable conversations are not recorded. These are intended to be intimate or private conversations that folks can have to really speak one-on-one with our speakers and providers and each other, and share all that wisdom and collected experience. So thank you once again for joining this amazing event. We're so pleased to bring you 2023 EmPOWER ME. This is brought to you by Solve ME as part of Advocacy Week, an annual mobilization that happens across the country where we come together to elevate our voices, our stories, and move mountains, including members of Congress, which can be mountains in themselves. So please follow us on the following social media channels if you'd like to learn more. Again, this presentation will be on YouTube and recorded if you'd like to come back and watch it again. And that YouTube channel is youtube.com/solvecfs. Thank you once again for all of your time. We're so pleased to have you, and we will see you at EmPOWER ME 2024. Take care.